The rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming against the cracked pavement of the hospital parking lot. Margaret Hayes stood under the faint glow of a flickering street lamp, her nurse's scrubs clinging to her skin, soaked through. Her hands trembled as she clutched a crumpled letter, the ink smearing under the downpour. Fired. After 27 years of bandaging wounds, holding hands, and whispering comfort to patients in their darkest hours, the hospital had let her go. Budget cuts, they said. Her graying hair stuck to her forehead, and her eyes, red from silent tears, stared blankly at the empty lot. She was 62, alone, and now jobless. How does a woman start over when the world says she's too old to matter? Margaret's sneakers squished as she trudged toward the bus stop, her worn-out purse slung over her shoulder. The cold seeped into her bones, but it was the ache in her chest that hurt more. She'd given everything to that hospital-missed birthdays, anniversaries, even her daughter's high school graduation. Her marriage had crumbled under the weight of her long shifts, and her daughter, now grown, lived halfway across the country. Nursing was all she had left, her purpose, her identity, and now it was gone. She sat on the wet bench at the bus stop, the rain pooling around her feet, and wondered if she'd ever feel warm again. Across the street, a man stumbled out of a dimly lit convenience store, his coat tattered and his steps uneven. He was older, maybe in his late 60s, with a grizzled beard and eyes that darted nervously. He clutched a paper bag, the top of a cheap whiskey bottle peeking out. Margaret watched him, her nurse's instincts kicking in despite her own despair. Something was wrong. His face was pale, almost gray, and his left arm hung limply at his side. He took a few steps, then swayed, grabbing the edge of a trash can to steady himself. The bottle slipped from his bag, shattering on the pavement. He didn't even flinch, just sank to his knees, gasping. Margaret's heart raced. She didn't think she moved. Her purse hit the ground as she ran across the street, the rain blurring her vision. "Sir, are you okay?" she called, kneeling beside him. His breathing was shallow, his skin clammy. She pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, feeling a weak, irregular pulse. "Can you hear me? I'm a nurse. I need you to talk to me." His eyes fluttered, unfocused, but he managed a faint nod. "Chest. Hurts," he wheezed, clutching his jacket. Margaret's training took over. Heart attack, she thought. She scanned the empty street, no one else was around. The store clerk was inside, oblivious, and her phone was back at the bus stop, useless in the rain. "Stay with me," she said, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her throat. She helped him lie back on the wet pavement, propping his head on her soaked purse. "I'm right here. You're not alone." She loosened his collar, her hands moving with the muscle memory of years in the emergency room. She needed help, but the nearest hospital was blocks away, and no cars were passing. The rain stung her eyes as she waved frantically at the empty road, praying for someone to stop. "Breathe slow," she told him, her voice soft but firm. "In and out, I've got you." His hand gripped hers, weak but desperate, and she squeezed back, her own fears forgotten. Minutes felt like hours, but finally, headlights pierced the rain. A delivery van screeched to a stop, and a young driver jumped out, his eyes wide. "What's happening?" he shouted. "Call 911. Margaret yelled, not taking her eyes off the man. "Tell them it's a possible heart attack! Hurry!" The driver fumbled with his phone, his hands shaking as he relayed the message. Margaret kept talking to the man, her voice a lifeline. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to keep him conscious. "Frank?" he rasped, his eyes locked on hers. "Frank, I don't want to die." Her throat tightened, but she forced a small smile. "You're not going anywhere, Frank. I'm here and help's coming." The ambulance arrived in a blaze of sirens and red lights. Paramedics rushed over, and Margaret rattled off Frank's symptoms with the precision of a seasoned nurse. Pulse weak, chest pain, clammy skin. They loaded him onto a stretcher, and one of the paramedics, a young woman with kind eyes, touched Margaret's arm. "You did good," she said. "You probably saved his life." Margaret nodded, too exhausted to respond as they whisked Frank away. She stood there, drenched and shivering, watching the ambulance disappear into the night. The delivery driver offered her a ride, but she shook her head. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice hollow. She walked back to the bus stop, picked up her sodden purse, and sat down, the weight of the day crashing over her. The next morning, Margaret woke to the faint smell of coffee in her small apartment. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the hospital's cold dismissal and Frank's terrified eyes. She shuffled to the kitchen, her slippers scuffing the worn linoleum, and poured a cup from her ancient coffee maker. The mug warmed her hands, but it did little to lift the fog in her heart. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at the unpaid bills stacked neatly beside a framed photo of her daughter, smiling at her college graduation. Margaret's fingers traced the frame, her chest aching. She'd always told herself her sacrifices were worth it, that helping others was her calling. But now, with no job and no savings, she felt like she'd failed everyone, including herself. A knock at the door startled her. She set the mug down, her brow furrowing. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her apartment building, a tired brick structure in a small Ohio town, wasn't exactly a hub of visitors. She smoothed her cardigan and opened the door, expecting a neighbor or a delivery mistake. Instead, a man stood there, his face familiar but out of place. It was Frank, the man from the rain, looking healthier but still fragile. His coat was patched but clean, and his eyes held a nervous warmth. Behind him stood a younger man, maybe in his 30s, with a shy smile and a neatly pressed flannel shirt. "Margaret?" Frank said, his voice rough but steady. I got your name from the paramedics. I hope it's okay I came." She blinked, stunned. "Frank? You're okay?" He nodded, his lips trembling into a smile. "Thanks to you. The doctor said if you hadn't acted so fast, I wouldn't have made it." Margaret's cheeks flushed, and she waved a hand, embarrassed. "I just did what anyone would." Frank shook his head. "No, ma'am, not anyone." He gestured to the younger man. "This is my son, Daniel. We wanted to thank you proper." Daniel stepped forward, holding out a small paper bag. "It's not much," he said, his voice soft, "but we thought you might like some breakfast." Margaret peeked inside a warm cinnamon roll from the local bakery, still steaming, and a small thermos of coffee. Her eyes stung, and she clutched the bag to her chest. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice catching. Frank's eyes softened. "You sat with me in the rain, held my hand when I thought I was done for. This is the least we could do." Margaret invited them in, her apartment feeling warmer with their presence. They sat at her tiny table, sharing the cinnamon roll and sipping coffee, the conversation tentative at first, but growing easier. Frank told her about his life, how he'd been a mechanic for 40 years, fixing cars in a small garage until arthritis and a bad back forced him to retire. He'd lost his wife to cancer a decade ago, and the grief had driven him to drink more than he should. Daniel, his only son, worked as a delivery driver, the same one who'd stopped to help last night. "Dad's been struggling," Daniel admitted, his voice low. "I try to check on him, but I work long hours. Last night, I thought I'd lost him." His eyes met Margaret's, filled with gratitude. "You gave me my dad back." Margaret listened, her heart swelling. She shared a little about herself, how nursing had been her life, how losing her job felt like losing a piece of her soul. Frank leaned forward, his hands clasped. "You're a nurse through and through," he said. "Doesn't matter what some hospital says. You saved me, not with a degree or a paycheck, but with your heart." His words hit her hard, and she looked away, blinking back tears. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope, like a candle in a storm. They talked for hours, the morning slipping away. Frank shared stories of his old garage, how he'd fix cars for single moms who couldn't pay, letting them slide with a promise of homemade cookies instead. Daniel laughed, recalling how his dad once spent a whole weekend rebuilding a neighbor's engine just because they needed to get to work. Margaret found herself smiling, her own troubles fading as she listened. There was something about Frank's quiet strength, his weathered hands and kind eyes, that reminded her of why she'd become a nursetto, make a difference, one person at a time. As they stood to leave, Frank hesitated at the door. "Margaret," he said, his voice low, "I don't have much, but if you ever need anything, a ride, a favor, someone to listen you, call me, okay?" He pressed a crumpled piece of paper into her hand with his phone number scrawled in shaky handwriting. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Daniel hugged her, quick but sincere, and whispered, "Thank you." As the door closed behind them, Margaret stood there, clutching the paper, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. That afternoon, she walked to the town's small diner, a cozy spot with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh apple pie. She ordered a coffee, more out of habit than need, and sat by the window watching the autumn leaves drift across the street. The diner was quiet, just a few regulars nursing their mugs, the jukebox playing a soft country tune. Margaret sipped her coffee, her mind replaying the morning. Frank's gratitude, Daniel's shy smile was enough to make her believe she still had something to give. She didn't notice the 4 sleek cars pulling up outside, their polished chrome glinting in the afternoon sun. The diner's bell jingled as a group of people walked in, 3 men and a woman, all well-dressed, their faces serious but kind. The woman, in her 40s with a warm smile, approached Margaret's table. "Are you Margaret Hayes?" she asked. Margaret nodded, confused. "I'm Laura from the community center," the woman said. "These gentlemen are from the hospital board." Margaret's stomach dropped, expecting another blow. Had she done something wrong last night? Laura sat across from her, her eyes bright. "We heard what you did for Frank last night," she said. "The paramedics told us everything, how you acted fast, kept him alive until help came. The whole town's talking about it." Margaret blushed, shaking her head. "It was nothing special," she said. "I'm a nurse. It's what I do." One of the men, an older gentleman with a silver tie, leaned forward. "It's exactly what you do," he said. "And it's why we're here." He explained that the hospital board had reconsidered their decision. Her firing had been a mistake, a rushed call by administrators who didn't know her value. They wanted her back not just as a nurse, but as a mentor for the younger staff, someone to teach compassion as much as technique. Margaret's hands shook around her coffee mug. I don't know what to say," she stammered. Laura reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Say yes," she said, her smile widening. "And there's more. The community center's been raising funds for local heroes, people like you, who give without expecting anything back. We heard about your situation, and we wanted to do something." She gestured to the window, where the 4 luxury cars sat parked. "Those are donations from local businesses. We're giving them to people who've made a difference in this town. One of them is yours." Margaret's breath caught. She stood, her legs unsteady, and walked to the window. The cars gleamed sleek, beautiful, far beyond anything she'd ever dreamed of owning. She turned back, tears streaming down her face. "I can't accept this," she said. "It's too much." The older man from the board stood, his voice gentle. "Margaret, you've spent your life giving to others. Let us give back to you just this once." The diner's regulars clapped, their faces beaming, and Laura hugged her tightly. For the first time in years, Margaret felt seen, not as a nurse or a failure, but as a person who mattered. That evening, she drove her new Cara, modest but elegant sedan back to her apartment, the leather seats warm against her back. She parked and sat there for a moment, the engine humming softly, her hands resting on the wheel. She thought of Frank, of his hand gripping hers in the rain, of Daniel's quiet gratitude. She thought of the hospital, where she'd return tomorrow, not just to work but to teach, to pass on what she'd learned about kindness and care. The rain had stopped and the sky was clear, the stars bright above the small town she'd called home for decades. One small act can change a life. Margaret had saved Frank's life in the rain, not knowing it would save her own. And now, as she stepped out of the car and looked up at the stars, she felt a warmth that no storm could wash away. Have you seen kindness change a life? Share your story in the comments.